Welcome to African Studies 101, lesson number 2. If you have not watched lesson number 1, you can go to my profile and you will find it in there. And I strongly suggest that you watch it because in that lesson we discussed the number one problem facing African or Black people. And it is the first step or the first building block of what we are doing here. Today we will discuss the origin and the purpose of racism and white supremacy. So let's get to it. And we start with this quote by the eminent scholar Neely Fuller Jr., who said, "If you do not understand white supremacy slash racism, what it is and how it works, everything else that you understand will only confuse you." And that statement is important because it reveals the fact that in order to properly understand our history or the history of African or Black people, you must understand racism, because without a proper understanding of that, you will be lost. You will be confused. You will have an incomplete and an inaccurate conceptualization about who African people are. So, what is the origin of racism, white supremacy? The origin finds itself in the European world, from the European world, from those who classify themselves as white people. And it started with a botanist by the name of Carl Linnaeus, who was Swedish and is known for developing the classification of plants. But he later expanded that system to the classification of human beings. His work was picked up later on by Johann Friedrich Blumenbach, who in 1795 wrote the book, The Natural Varieties of Mankind. And in that classification, he created three major races: Caucasoid, Mongoloid, and Negroid, and in that order, with whites being on the top and blacks being on the bottom. Someone came along some years later, about 20 years later, and said there are actually more than 20 different races: Caucasoid, Mongoloid, blah, 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 and Negroid, expanding on Blumenbach's concept. Sometime later, someone concluded that there were over 120 different races: Caucasoid, Mongoloid, blah, 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 and then Negroid. Note that it was always in that order, with Caucasoids being on the top, whites, and so-called Negroids, blacks, on the bottom. That is known as a racial construct. It is a fabrication. It is a creation. It has no basis in reality. And so now we look at, well, what was the purpose behind this? The purpose behind the creation of and the maintenance of racism is to elevate white people to an imaginary position of superiority. Now, you will note that this is in their mind. It is not a reality. It is a fabrication, something that they created. And the reason that they created this was to be able to control the economic resources of Black, brown, and yellow people. This would ensure that Black, brown, and yellow people would view themselves as inferior and would pose no threat to the European white superiority concept. And as a result of that creation, you would have a system that rewards and gives advantages, that is, privileges, benefits, bonuses, blessings, upper hand, edge, power, however you want to call it, would give advantages to those who are white skinned. But it would at the same time punish and penalize those who are not white skinned. Now, we know all of this. We have lived this. If you are an African or a black person, we know this information. But it gives you a grounding, a foundation from which to explore and understand why there is this antagonism that goes on, where they don't want us to know our history, where they have hidden information from us. They will not teach it in their school systems because the idea of our inferiority, supposed inferiority, must be maintained. Now, next, what we're going to do is look at, well, how is this system maintained, and in what areas of life do we find it? And so that will be in lesson number 3. If you have any questions or comments, let me know what you think in the comments about these concepts that I've talked about thus far.